Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Today, we're getting into something huge, something that kind of haunts us, doesn't it? This core question. Why do we as humans keep building these incredibly complex things? Civilizations, technologies, whole economies, just to watch them stumble or even collapse. Often because of things that, looking back, seem completely obvious. Mismanagement, short-term greed, inequality.
It really is the recurring nightmare of history, isn't it? We seem to have the data, we certainly have the ingenuity, but somehow we fail to connect the dots across these massive complex systems until it's, well, often too late. But the source material we're looking at today proposes something radical, an integrated approach called the Resource Stability AI, or RSAI framework.
Okay, RSAI, let's unpack that. So this isn't just like a better algorithm, it's positioned as something much bigger.
Much bigger. Think of it as a comprehensive AI system designed specifically to counteract our collective blind spots. Its core mission is pattern recognition, prediction, and then optimization. And critically, it aims to do this across everything. Human activity, natural systems, the whole interconnected web. It's trying to be essentially an anti-collapse mechanism.
An anti-collapse engine. I like that. So how does it actually propose to do that? The sources mentioned 5 core functions.
That's right. 5 key things define its scope. First, and this is foundational, it monitors resources. Economic, environmental, social, biological, the works. All in real time with high fidelity. You need that complete picture.
Okay, so step 1 is just seeing everything clearly. What's next?
Step 2 moves into prediction. This is crucial. It's designed to predict the knock-on effects. The second, third, even fourth order consequences of a decision before we actually make it.
So it lets us see the potential train wreck down the line.
Exactly, allowing for preemptive course correction. Then comes the interactive part. It has to be dynamic, right? So function 3 is adaptation. It constantly adjusts its recommendations based on new data, changing circumstances. It learns.
And what about us, the humans in the loop?
That's function 4, and it's vital for getting buy-in. It actively educates, it translates all that complex data, those predicted consequences, into feedback humans can actually understand and act on, making the invisible visible.
Which brings us to the payoff, function 5.
The whole point, really. It prevents catastrophic resource depletion and system collapses through these early warnings and intervention recommendations. The underlying idea is simple. History is full of disasters we could have seen coming if we just had the right lens.
Right. And this gets to what the source calls the shame factor. It's almost embarrassing, isn't it?
It is. The source points out, look, we collectively know enough to stop collapsing fisheries or polluting rivers or crashing economies.
Yeah.
We have the knowledge, yet we do it anyway.
So the AI is meant to be a corrective for our own built-in flaws. The source lists a few specific ones.
Yeah, it highlights the big ones. Our short-term thinking, always prioritizing the immediate win over long-term survival. Our failure to see invisible connections, how like a farming subsidy change here could trigger instability halfway across the world.
Our sheer cognitive limitations, too. These global systems are just too complex for one human brain or even a committee to fully grasp.
Absolutely. Then you have competing interests, different groups actively working against coordination, and just basic knowledge gaps. Sometimes we genuinely don't know a system is failing until it's already falling apart.
So the RSAI is designed to tackle all of these simultaneously.
That's the audacious goal, to be the prosthetic foresight we seem to lack.
Okay, to really get how this RSAI could possibly counter these fundamental human failings, we need to look inside the black box. How does it actually calculate these stability patterns? It's supposed to be more holistic than anything we have now, right?
Yeah. Right. It's not just about faster predictions. The sources describe it as a multi-layered pattern recognition system. It's about the integration.
Integration being the key word. Because right now, everything's siloed.
Exactly. You've got your economic models over here, climate models over there, maybe some social trend analysis somewhere else. RSAI aims to break down those walls. It synthesizes patterns across 5 distinct dimensions, all at the same time.
Okay, walk us through those dimensions. How do they build on each other?
So layer 1 is the basic stuff. Temporal patterns, that's your standard historical trends, how much fish was caught last year, the year before the current state, and basic future projections based on that trend. Gives you direction and speed.
Okay, the when.
Then layer 2 adds the where. Spatial patterns, this maps the distribution. Where are the fish stocks concentrated? Where is the fishing effort highest? Where's the water versus where's the demand? Get the geographic picture.
Got it. When and where.
Yeah.
Now the tricky part. Why?
Exactly. Layer 3 is causal patterns. This is about direct links. Action X leads to outcome Y. So building a specific dam directly reduces downstream flow. Pretty straightforward cause and effect.
But it's often not that simple, is it?
No, and that's where layer 4 comes in, correlation patterns. This is more subtle. It identifies things that tend to happen together even if the direct causal link isn't immediately obvious to us.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, maybe you see high levels of online chatter about food prices correlating strongly with increased immigration applications from a certain region. One doesn't directly cause the other in a simple A to B way, but the correlation signals underlying stress in the system.
It's like feeling the pressure building up, even if you don't see the crack yet.
Precisely. And that leads to the final and maybe most crucial layer for predicting actual collapse. Anomaly patterns.
The outliers.
Yes. Those statistical blips, the deviations from the norm that signal something's wrong, a sudden spike in, say, trading volume for a specific commodity, or a weird localized drop in reported air quality from sensors. These anomalies are often the first visible signs of a system starting to wobble before it fails spectacularly.
Okay, this multi-layer approach makes sense, but the part that really jumped out at me from the source material was this idea of cross-domain pattern matching.
Ah, yes. This is potentially the most powerful aspect.
The argument is that the fundamental patterns of collapse are universal. They repeat across completely different fields.
That's the core insight. It allows the AI to develop genuine foresight, not just hindsight. The source identifies this recurring sequence. You start with initial abundance of a resource. This fuels exponential growth and exploitation, which then leads to a gradual decline as the resource gets stressed. Then, often quite suddenly, you hit a tipping point, catastrophic collapse. And after that, a long, difficult, sometimes impossible recovery.
And the AI sees this same pattern, whether it's looking at fish or forests or finance.
Exactly. It doesn't care about the specifics of the resource. If it detects the early stages of that abundance stress decline sequence, it recognizes the signature. It knows what history suggests comes next.
So it can literally learn from, say, a financial crisis to predict an ecological one. Can you give that specific analogy from the sources?
Sure. Think about overfishing, a classic example. You find a new, rich fishing ground. Initial catches are massive, huge short-term profit, so more boats come in, fishing effort ramps up. Stocks start to decline, but slowly at first. Maybe regulators argue, delay action, then boom, the stock collapses below a viable level. Recovery is slow, if ever.
Okay, I see that pattern.
Now, the AI recognizes that this exact behavioral and systemic pattern, the rush for short-term gain, the delayed response, the sudden crash, mirrors what happens in deforestation. Initial logging is profitable, rules are lax, gradual loss, then a sudden ecological tipping point where the forest ecosystem flips.
And it mirrors aquifer depletion too, right? Pumping water faster than it recharges.
Precisely. Same pattern. The AI isn't just modeling the water level, it's recognizing the human system pattern driving the depletion, the discounting of the future, the political inertia, the tragedy of the commons playing out again.
So when it sees, I don't know, a new deep-sea mining venture starting up with incredibly rapid extraction rates,
it doesn't just compare it to other mining operations, it cross-references that acceleration pattern with the collapse patterns from fisheries, from logging, from groundwater depletion to gauge the potential speed and severity of this potential collapse. It prevents us from being surprised by the uniqueness of each crisis.
which means the system has to be constantly learning, adapting in real time. That feedback loop is essential.
Absolutely non-negotiable. It's built for continuous validation. It's constantly hoovering up new data satellite feeds, financial transactions, government reports, sensor networks, and checking. How did my prediction from last quarter hold up against reality?
And if it's wrong,
The algorithms get adjusted. The weighting of different factors changes. It learns from its mistakes, ideally faster than the problems themselves evolve. This is how it aims to catch those black swan events, the novel threats we haven't seen before, by recognizing their underlying patterns match sequences that have led to collapse elsewhere.
oh, okay, we've got the theory, the architecture, but the real test is applying this to the messy reality of our world, right? Especially the cycles of boom and bust in finance, the flare-ups of political instability. Let's dive into Section 2, the applications, starting with economic patterns.
Right. Finance is almost the perfect test case because the paradox is so clear. Financial crises feel inevitable because human incentives consistently favor short-term gains, often ignoring growing structural risks. The RSA is tuned specifically to spot these telltale signs. The classic boom-bust cycles, usually rooted in asset bubbles, The way inequality amplification creates these destabilizing feedback loops where wealth concentration actually undermines broad economic health, and the hidden dangers of supply chain fragility, where optimizing for pure efficiency makes the whole system vulnerable to shocks.
Let's make it concrete. The 2008 housing crisis. That wasn't just a failure of math, was it? It felt like a failure of imagination, people refusing to believe the warning signs. What specific patterns would RSA have flagged, according to the sources?
The sources lay out a clear convergence. First, the most basic temporal pattern. Housing prices were skyrocketing, rising way faster than average wages for years. That's the classic signature of an unsustainable asset bubble. Anyone could see it, but the system ignored it.
Okay, that's pattern one.
Pattern two, the causal pattern of bad behavior. The AI would have tracked the rapid, documented decline in mortgage lending standards, giving loans to people who clearly couldn't afford them. Obvious, but decentralized, so no single actor felt responsible.
And then the really complex stuff, the financial engineering that hid the risk.
Exactly. The credit default swaps, CDS. Now, for listeners maybe not deep in finance, think of these like insurance policies on debt. But the problem was far more insurance was being sold than the actual value of the mortgages being insured. It created this illusion of safety while actually concentrating and hiding massive systemic risk. RSAI would see this correlation pattern, the sheer volume of CDS issuance disconnected from underlying value, as a huge red flag. Risk wasn't being managed, it was being shuffled around and amplified.
Okay, so unsustainable prices, bad lending, hidden risk.
Yeah.
What's the fourth pattern?
The shift in market psychology. The AI would detect that the reason for buying and selling mortgage-backed securities had changed. It wasn't about long-term investment in housing, it became pure speculation. Flipping assets for short-term profit, completely detached from the fundamental value of the homes themselves.
So RSAI wouldn't just see these four things separately.
But we'd see the convergence. That's the key. The system screaming instability from multiple angles simultaneously.
And what would the actual output have looked like? The alert.
According to the source's simulation, by 2006, the alert would be stark. Housing price-to-income ratio exceeds historical stability threshold by 40%. Clear, quantified.
Followed by a prediction.
A sharp one. Financial contagion probability, 73% within 18 months. Likely trigger, defaults cascade in subprime mortgage sector, and crucially, a recommendation. Implement immediate lending standards reset. Urgently increase capital reserve requirements for institutions with significant CDS exposure.
Actions that would have been painful then, but could have averted the meltdown. That lead time is everything.
It's the core value proposition. 2 years of warning to deflate the bubble gradually instead of letting it burst catastrophically.
Let's apply that idea to something current. Inflation prediction. That requires weaving together so many different threads, economic, environmental, political.
Yes, this is where that cross-domain pattern matching becomes so powerful. The AI isn't just looking at money supply. It's monitoring global supply chains, port congestion data, shipping container availability alongside commodity futures prices, energy costs, even weather patterns affecting agriculture.
Okay, give me an example of how it connects those dots.
All right, so the source describes the scenario. RSAI detects significant fertilizer shortages emerging in March, maybe linked to spiking natural gas prices and energy pattern. It immediately connects this, through its agricultural models, to predict reduced crop yields or higher farming costs globally. This leads to a forecast of wheat price increases hitting the markets by July.
And it doesn't stop there. It connects to the human impact.
Right. Because it integrates economic and social data, it sees those higher wheat prices translating into likely bread price spikes by October. And then critically, it flags that those spikes, combined with existing poverty data for specific regions, create a heightened food insecurity risk and potential social unrest by January.
Wow. So it connects the chemical shortage today to potential riots 9 months down the line.
Exactly. Giving governments and aid organizations that crucial window to act maybe with targeted food subsidies or efforts to diversify supply chains before the crisis hits the streets.
Okay, let's shift from finance to, well, the stability of societies themselves. Resource stress, climate change, these aren't just abstract issues. They directly fuel social unrest, political instability, even conflict. How does RSAI spot these precursors?
It's looking for patterns where resource systems directly impact social and political systems. It tracks specific indicators like resource conflict precursors, basically, historical data showing how often scarcity of water or land or food leads to organized violence in a region. It also monitors governance collapse indicators. Things like measurable drops in public trust in government, rising corruption perception indices, or even just the government's inability to implement its own policies effectively. Slowdown in bureaucracy can be a sign of decay.
And the social fabric itself.
Yeah, it tracks polarization dynamics, how society fragments under stress. It looks at the rise of extremist rhetoric online, segregation patterns, things like that. And it tries to identify specific revolution triggers those thresholds in unemployment, food prices, or inequality that historically seem to push societies towards mass unrest.
The sources use the Syrian civil war, the lead-up between 2006 and 2010. That's a kind of tragic perfect storm example. What data would RSAI have been weaving together there?
It was a devastating convergence. First, the environmental layer. The worst drought in Syria in supposedly 900 years. Massive, widespread crop failures. An ecological pattern with immediate human consequences.
Which were?
Huge displacement. 1.5 million rural people, mostly farmers and their families, flooding into cities that were already struggling. A massive spatial pattern shift, putting immense strain on urban resources. Simultaneously, the temporal patterns were flashing red. Youth unemployment was already over 25%, and the price of basic foods had doubled due to the drought and bad policy. Economic stress piled on environmental stress.
And the government's response.
That was the killer. Widespread reports of corruption meant that what little aid was available often didn't reach the people who needed it. The AI would have registered this as a sharp decline in government legitimacy, directly linked to its failure to manage the drought stress. It wasn't just ineffective, it was seen as actively harmful.
And you had social media amplifying all this.
Exactly, tracking the rapid spread of grievances online. So you have this convergence: ecological collapse, mass displacement, economic desperation, and a government losing all credibility. It's the absolute textbook precursor to state failure.
So if RSAI had been running, what would its timeline have looked like compared to the actual outbreak in 2011?
The simulated timeline is sobering. As early as 2007, an alert, agricultural collapse driving population displacement towards critical urban instability thresholds. Pretty clear. By 2009, the warning becomes urgent. Convergence detected, multi-year drought impact plus food security crisis plus governance failure, high probability of revolution-level instability within 24 months.
And the recommendations, not military, I assume?
No, structural. Things like emergency agricultural aid focused on stabilizing rural areas, massive investment in urban infrastructure housing, water, jobs to cope with the displaced population, and crucially, immediate governance reforms aimed at tackling corruption and restoring some measure of public trust.
Basically 3 to 4 years of actionable warning before the violence exploded. That's hard to ignore.
It changes the entire dynamic from reaction to potential prevention. Think about the broader Arab Spring context. The preconditions were visible across the region.
Right. What would RSAI have seen there?
It would have seen the converging economic and social patterns. Bread prices jumping 40% in just 6 months in several countries. Youth unemployment stubbornly high, often over 30%. Governments cutting subsidies on essential goods.
And add the spark?
Add the spark. A measurable surge in online anger and organization, grievances being shared and amplified. The AI recognizes this historical recipe for mass protests.
And it would quantify the risk.
Yes, it would generate a specific probability. Mass protest likelihood, 72% within 90 days. Risk of significant violence, 45%. Risk of government collapse, 28%. Again, it's not predicting the future with certainty, but it's giving policymakers that critical window to maybe diffuse the situation, targeted subsidies, emergency job programs before it ignites.
Let's move to the environmental domain. This feels incredibly urgent because, as the sources stress, ecological tipping points can be abrupt, nonlinear, and often irreversible. Once you go over the edge, you might not be able to come back.
Exactly. That's the core challenge here. Gradual change suddenly flipping a system into a completely new state. RSAI targets these systemic failures by tracking indicators of ecosystem stress. Things like biodiversity loss patterns, extinctions, often follow predictable sequences as an ecosystem unravels, and crucially, identifying positive climate feedback loops.
Like Arctic melt. Less ice means less reflection, means more warming, means more melt.
Precisely. Where warming itself triggers processes that accelerate further warming. These loops make the problem exponentially harder to solve the longer we wait. RSAI is designed to spot them early.
The source uses the Amazon rainforest as a major real-time example, an ecosystem so vast it impacts global climate. What's RSAI monitoring there?
It's integrating multiple data streams. High-resolution satellite imagery tracks the precise rate and location of deforestation day by day. But it goes deeper. Microwave sensors monitoring soil moisture levels across the basin, detailed rainfall pattern analysis, sensors tracking tree health and die-off rates, especially in vulnerable areas near the forest edges. It's even monitoring the forest's changing capacity to absorb CO2.
And what's the pattern it's detecting right now?
It's alarming. Deforestation has cleared roughly 17% of the original rainforest. Now, multiple independent climate models predict that the tipping point where the forest can no longer sustain itself as a rainforest and starts degrading into a drier, savanna-like ecosystem lies somewhere between 20% and 25% deforestation.
We're getting dangerously close to that threshold.
Very close. And other patterns reinforce the danger. Temporal analysis shows the dry season in the southern and eastern Amazon is getting longer by nearly 2 weeks per decade. Spatial analysis shows fire frequency is increasing exponentially, particularly in those same drought-stressed regions.
It's that feedback loop again, isn't it?
It is. Less rain stresses the trees, making them more vulnerable to fire. More fires release more carbon, contributing to warming, which further disrupts rainfall patterns. It's a vicious cycle.
So what's the RSAI prediction based on this convergence?
It's stark and probabilistic. Savannization tipping point probability, 35% by 2030, rising to 67% by 2040. Likely irreversible transformation. The predicted consequences are catastrophic. Loss of maybe 60% of Amazonian species, major disruption to rainfall patterns affecting agriculture across South America and potentially beyond, and the release of something like 140 billion tons of stored carbon, which would dramatically accelerate global warming.
Now, what's really interesting here is how the RSAI approach goes beyond just sounding the alarm. It reframes the problem, right?
Yeah.
It tries to make conservation make economic sense.
Yes, this is critical for actually changing behavior. It doesn't just say, save the rainforest. It provides a hard economic valuation. The AI calculates that the intact rainforest provides services, climate regulation, water cycling, biodiversity worth approximately $250 billion annually to the global economy. This is value we currently get for free, but would have to pay dearly to replace.
And then it offers alternatives.
Concrete, economically viable alternatives tailored to the region. It might calculate that a combination of sustainable forestry practices, well-managed ecotourism, and selling carbon credits for preserved areas could generate $180 billion annually for the local and national economies. Less than total exploitation, maybe, but sustainable long-term.
And it personalizes the threat, too.
Exactly. It doesn't just talk about global climate. It shows models demonstrating to, say, a specific group of Brazilian farmers how continued deforestation in that area will directly reduce their local rainfall over the next decade, impacting their crop yields. It connects the abstract danger to tangible personal consequences. It tries to shift the incentive structure away from short-term extraction towards long-term stability.
Okay, let's bring this down to the biological level. Epidemics, pandemics, even personal health. Rapid pattern recognition seems absolutely key here. We all just lived through COVID-19, a perfect, tragic example of slow or fragmented recognition.
Absolutely. The core failure in early 2020, looking back, was the siloed data. You had doctors in Wuhan seeing patients with weird pneumonia symptoms. You had pharmacies maybe noticing a run on fever meds. You had researchers maybe sequencing unusual viruses. But no single system was putting those pieces together globally in real time.
So how would RSAI have tackled the emergence of COVID-19 in, say, December 2019? What data points would it have connected?
According to the source's simulation, it would work like this. The AI is constantly monitoring hospital admission data worldwide, anonymized, of course. It flags an unusual statistical cluster of admissions for atypical pneumonia emerging in Wuhan hospitals. That's anomaly detection. Simultaneously, it's tracking retail data. It sees a correlated spike in sales of fever and cough medications in pharmacies within that same geographic area, another anomaly. Then it integrates mobility data, anonymized cell phone data or travel bookings showing a high volume of travel from Wuhan to major international hub cities. That's the spread vector. And finally, it scrapes and analyzes public data streams, news reports, social media filtering for keywords like mystery illness, unexplained respiratory symptoms in that region.
So the rapid convergence of all those signals,
Yeah.
biological anomaly, the consumer behavior, the travel patterns, the online chatter that triggers the alarm.
Precisely. That convergence is the key pattern. The simulated timeline suggests that around December 28, 2019, RSAI would issue an alert. Anomalous respiratory illness cluster detected in Wuhan. Probability of novel pathogen, 65%. And then, crucially, within about a week, by January 5th, 2020, it follows up with an urgent recommendation. implement immediate targeted travel restrictions from the affected region, initiate emergency stockpiling of relevant medical resources, masks, ventilators, prioritize global laboratory resources for pathogen identification and sequencing.
Months of potential lead time compared to what actually happened. The difference it could have made, it's almost unimaginable.
The potential to shift from panicked reaction to proactive preparation, limiting spread, developing tests, preparing hospitals, it's profound. The cost savings, the lives saved, it highlights the immense value of this kind of integrated biological surveillance.
And this pattern recognition power extends down to the individual level too. The source uses an example of predicting a heart attack.
Yeah, the example of James, age 52. He's using wearables, a smartwatch, maybe a sleep tracker. These devices are collecting high-frequency biometric data. Heart rate variability, HRV, sleep stages and quality, maybe even stress biomarkers derived from skin conductance or heart rate.
Stuff most people look at day to day, maybe.
Right, but the AI isn't just looking at today's numbers, it's analyzing the patterns over time. It detects a specific profile emerging for James. His HRV has been trending downwards consistently for 3 months. His deep sleep percentage is declining. Certain stress markers are chronically elevated, even on days he reports feeling fine. It matches this multi-signal pattern against a vast database of historical biometric data linked to health outcomes. It finds a strong correlation between James's emerging profile and the profiles of individuals who subsequently experienced a major cardiac event.
So it's not diagnosing, but it's flagging a risk pattern.
Exactly. The AI generates a personalized, actionable alert. Cardiovascular health pattern analysis indicates a 35% increased risk of a heart attack within the next 6 months. Recommendation: consult with your physician regarding targeted dietary changes, incorporating more Zone 2 cardio exercise, and potentially preventative medication review.
The benefit being James gets intervention before the heart attack.
Yes, he avoids the acute event, potentially saving his life. And from a system perspective, it saves the healthcare system a huge amount, maybe $100,000 or more in emergency care, surgery, rehabilitation, lost productivity. Prevention, enabled by pattern recognition, creates massive resource stability benefits across the board.
Okay, the technical potential seems clear. The applications, frankly, are staggering. But technology is just a tool, right? We have to confront the human element. How does RSAI actually overcome our own tendencies towards self-sabotage? Let's get into those philosophical foundations.
Right, because a perfect prediction is useless if we ignore it. The source identifies the biggest hurdle as the temporal disconnect. Our brains just aren't wired for long-term thinking. We evolved to react to the tiger in the bushes now, not the climate change impact 50 years from now. That future risk feels abstract, unreal.
So how does AI bridge that gap?
By making the future concrete. It doesn't just say sea levels will rise. It says, based on current trends, the flood risk to your specific property will increase by 40% within 15 years, impacting insurance costs and resale value starting in 5 years. It quantifies it, personalizes it, and brings the future consequence into the present decision-making frame, makes it visceral.
It connects directly to the next big problem, the tragedy of the commons.
The classic dilemma. What's rational for me as an individual taking one extra fish, emitting a bit more carbon, becomes disastrous when everyone does it. We deplete the shared resource.
And RSAI's role here is coordination.
Primarily, yes. It combats the tragedy by making the collective impact visible in real time. It shows not just your small withdrawal from the aquifer, but the aggregate drawdown from all users, and predicts the point of collapse for everyone if the current rate continues. It provides the shared data needed for coordinated action, ideally before the well runs dry.
And then there's just the sheer complexity of it all, our complexity blindness.
Yeah. Modern global systems, finance, supply chains, climate are just orders of magnitude more complex than human intuition can handle. We can't possibly map all the potential unintended consequences of our actions.
Like pulling on one thread and unraveling the whole sweater without realizing it.
Exactly. The AI's role here is simulation, running millions of what-if scenarios based on proposed policies or observed trends to map those potential cascades. It highlights the hidden fragilities, the non-obvious connections that could bring the system down. It tries to give us that cognitive map we lack.
Okay, but here's the rub for me. The AI can model the complexity, make the future visible, show the collective impact. It can generate the perfect, logical, data-driven recommendation. Stop deforestation. Reform lending standards. But how does it overcome political inertia?
That's the trillion-dollar question, isn't it?
Politicians have election cycles. CEOs have quarterly reports. Our systems are designed for short-term thinking. How does a recommendation based on a 30-year forecast actually get implemented when the decision maker might be out of office in 3 years?
Right. This is probably the biggest operational hurdle. The source material doesn't claim the AI forces action. Its primary function here is described as providing an evidence counterbalance. Meaning it can't dictate policy, but it can relentlessly inject the quantified long-term consequences into the short-term debate. It counters the "we can't afford it now" argument by showing the even greater quantified cost of inaction later. It highlights the risks, economic damage, social instability likely to manifest within the current political term if the long-term advice is ignored.
So it arms the long-term advocates with data.
Exactly. It tries to shift the political calculus by making the cost of short-term thinking undeniable and politically painful. It doesn't eliminate politics, but it grounds the debate more firmly in reality.
Let's look at some specific behaviors. Resource hoarding. The toilet paper fiasco during early COVID is such a bizarre, perfect example of how fear creates scarcity.
It really is. A textbook case of a behavioral cascade collapsing a simple supply chain. The pattern was so clear. Lockdown announcements trigger general anxiety. A few people buy extra, just in case. Someone posts a picture of a slightly depleted shelf online. Media amplifies it, panic buying. That creates social proof. Everyone else must know something I don't, triggering widespread panic buying. Voila. Artificial scarcity, even though the factories were still churning out toilet paper just fine.
So how does RSAI interrupt that kind of feedback loop?
Early detection and transparent information. The AI, monitoring retail sales velocity data and maybe social media sentiment analysis, flags it instantly. Anomaly detected, panic buying pattern emerging for product X. Cross-reference supply chain data, actual shortage risk, LW, root cause, behavioral cascade. The intervention is then twofold. 1, targeted recommendation to retailers, implement temporary purchase limits immediately to restore perceived fairness and signal control. 2, provide data for clear public messaging. Confirmed, production capacity for product X remains at 110% of normal demand. Supply lines are secure, limits are temporary to ensure equitable access during initial surge.
You break the panic loop by replacing fear and uncertainty with data and reassurance.
Exactly. Certainty short-circuits the cascade.
Now, this hoarding pattern isn't just about consumer goods. The source talks about intellectual property hoarding, using insulin pricing as a stark example.
Yes, this is hoarding the resource of knowledge, with potentially deadly consequences. Insulin itself was discovered nearly a century ago. The basic mechanism is well understood. But layers of secondary patents on delivery methods or minor formulation tweaks keep prices extraordinarily high in some markets. The pattern RSAI detects is price increased maybe 300% over 15 years with minimal fundamental innovation during that period. The consequence? Reports of diabetics rationing insulin, leading to hospitalizations and preventable deaths. It's a resource access collapse pattern.
So the AI performs a kind of societal cost-benefit analysis.
Right. It runs a societal resource calculation. Okay, the current patent system allows company Y to make, say, $5 billion in profit annually from this insulin product line. But the AI calculates the societal cost of that restricted access. Maybe $30 billion annually in excess hospital costs, lost productivity from sick workers, premature deaths, diabetic complications, etc.
In the alternative?
It models an alternative. What if we had a system balancing innovation reward with faster access? Maybe the company profit drops to $2 billion, but the societal gain reduced healthcare spending, improved health outcomes, increased productivity amounts to $25 billion. The net resource stability for society improves by $27 billion a year under the more open model.
So the recommendation isn't ideological. It's based purely on optimizing the overall resource stability.
Precisely. It might recommend specific patent reform mechanisms that achieve that balance, treating life-saving medical knowledge as a crucial resource that needs stable, equitable flow, not just a private commodity.
And this leads directly into the broader patterns of inequality and fairness. The AI has to see these as stability risks, too.
Absolutely foundational. It recognizes extreme wealth concentration, disparities in access to basics like healthcare, education, and systemic discrimination, not just as moral issues, but as direct threats to long-term societal stability.
Based on historical data.
Yes. The economic analysis is stark. It tracks metrics like the Gini coefficient or the wealth share of the top 1%. It notes that when inequality crosses certain historical thresholds where, say, the bottom 50% lack basic economic security, the probability of social unrest, crime, and political breakdown rises dramatically. The source even contains a provocative warning. If current inequality trends continue unchecked, Some models predict instability levels comparable to those preceding major historical revolutions. They literally use the phrase French Revolution levels by 2050.
That's quite a statement. And the AI tracks the downstream effects of this inequality.
Yes. Things like reduced overall consumer demand, because wealth is concentrated, not circulating.
Yeah.
Increased political polarization fueled by resentment, erosion of social trust, and ultimately a breakdown in the social cohesion needed to tackle other big problems, like climate change. It becomes a paralyzing force.
So what kind of recommendations does it make, again, impartially?
Based purely on stability metrics, it might suggest policies shown historically to reduce destabilizing inequality. Things like progressive taxation systems, investments in affordable housing, exploring universal basic income, UBI as a floor for resource stability, targeted job training programs. And it applies this fairness lens elsewhere, too, like the justice system. It can detect patterns where identical offenses receive vastly different sentences based purely on the defendant's race or wealth. That's not just unfair. It erodes legitimacy and breeds instability.
A clear pattern recognition task.
Exactly. It might calculate, for instance, that spending $20,000 per person on effective rehabilitation and reentry support programs demonstrably saves the state $200,000 down the line in reduced refunding, lower long-term incarceration costs, and reduced social disruption. So it might recommend systemic reforms like ending cash bail for nonviolent offenses or ensuring adequate funding for public defenders, all framed purely as optimizing long-term resource stability and societal function.
Okay, we have this potential powerhouse engine for analysis and foresight. But the elephant in the room is always trust. Perfect knowledge is worse than useless if people don't trust it, or if it's biased, or if it feels like some kind of big brother watching everything. How does the RSAI framework address this critical trust issue?
This is absolutely crucial, and the source material is very clear. Skepticism is expected and healthy. Trust can't be demanded. It has to be earned painstakingly over time. The analogy they use is weather forecasting. In the 1950s, people didn't really trust forecasts much beyond tomorrow. Accuracy was maybe 50%. Now, decades later, after relentless improvement, transparent tracking of accuracy, and visible results, we generally trust a 5-day forecast to be about 85% accurate. It took time and demonstrated reliability.
So RSAI needs to follow that same path. Start small, prove itself.
Exactly. The proposed path to trust involves 1. Start with lower stakes predictions where accuracy can be easily verified. Maybe predicting regional crop yields or short-term commodity price fluctuations. 2. Maintain a public, transparent scorecard. Track all major predictions against actual outcomes. Show the successes and the failures openly. 3. Build that track record over years, even decades, demonstrating increasing reliability and value. No overnight miracles.
And what about safeguards? How do we ensure the system itself is reliable and fair?
The framework outlines several key reliability measures. First, continuous validation. This isn't just internal testing. It means regular, independent, external audits of the algorithms and data inputs. Maybe even making core parts of the code open source for scrutiny. Second, uncertainty quantification. This is vital. The AI never claims perfect certainty. Every prediction must come with clear confidence intervals. Policymakers need to know if a prediction is a 95% certainty or coin flip 55%. That context is everything.
Prevents over-reliance. What about bias? AI bias is a huge concern.
Huge. So third is rigorous bias detection and correction. This means actively testing the AI's models and outputs for biases related to race, gender, income, geography, etc. And critically, all major policy recommendations generated by RSAI must undergo mandatory equity impact assessments to foresee and mitigate potential harms to vulnerable groups.
And finally, humans have to stay in charge.
Yeah.
Right? No HAL 9000 scenarios.
Absolutely non-negotiable. The final safeguard is human oversight. There must be clear emergency override mechanisms, kill switches, if you will. The system needs a distributed architecture so there's no single point of failure. And most importantly, the source emphasizes the creation of new human roles, those resource stability analysts, the AI ethics supervisors whose job includes explicitly questioning, challenging, and when necessary, overriding the AI's conclusions based on ethical considerations, context, or common sense that the AI might lack. Humans provide the ultimate judgment and moral compass.
Okay, let's look towards the horizon. The sources paint two dramatically different futures, depending on whether we adopt something like this RSAI foresight system or just muddle through as we are now. Let's start with the grim one. Scenario 1, the climate resource cascade, from 2025 to 2050.
Yeah, this is the trajectory if we continue the reactive, short-term approach. Without coordinated, proactive intervention guided by something like RSAI, the prediction is that various environmental and social systems start to fail in a cascading sequence. The timeline suggests that by 2030-2035, the water stress patterns RSAI is already detecting will become critical, directly affecting maybe 2 billion people. This triggers major crop failures in multiple breadbasket regions. Following that, between 2035 and 2040, the models predict mass migration on an unprecedented scale. We're talking potentially 500 million climate refugees displaced from newly uninhabitable zones, coastal areas, drought-stricken regions overwhelming borders, and existing infrastructure globally.
And that level of displacement inevitably fuels conflict.
Almost certainly. The projection for 2040-2045 sees widespread resource conflicts erupting, fighting over arable land, access to fresh water, basic necessities. This culminates, in this scenario, in societal collapse in multiple vulnerable regions by 2045-2050. Not necessarily global apocalypse, but simultaneous failure of governance, energy grids, food distribution, and social order in several parts of the world.
It's a bleak picture. The source uses a stark cost comparison to hammer this home, right? Reactive versus proactive.
It's designed to shock us into action. The estimated cost of the reactive path trying to manage these cascading crises with disaster relief, military interventions, rebuilding after the fact is put at over $50 trillion in cumulative global damages by mid-century, not to mention potentially over 100 million excess deaths and civilization-threatening instability.
Versus the proactive cost.
The proactive approach, investing now based on RSAI's early warnings and recommendations in things like resilient infrastructure, agricultural adaptation, clean energy transition, regional stability funds, is estimated to require around $5 trillion globally over the next couple of decades.
So the ROI is literally $45 trillion saved, plus preventing unimaginable human suffering.
That's the argument. It reframes preventative investment not as a cost, but as the biggest potential cost saving in human history. That 2025 warning, if acted upon, provides that crucial 5-10-year window to invest proactively and maintain stability, rather than paying exponentially more to clean up the mess later.
Okay, but let's not end on doom and gloom. The sources also paint a radically optimistic future. Scenario 2, AI-enabled resource abundance, running from 2030 out to 2070.
Right, this is the flip side. The revolutionary potential if we actually leverage this kind of foresight and optimization engine effectively. It starts with what they call the efficiency revolution, roughly 2030-2040. Because RSAI is fine-tuning processes everywhere, from manufacturing and logistics to energy grids and building management, systemic resource waste could potentially be reduced by as much as 60% globally. Think of smart grids cutting energy loss, precision agriculture doubling yields while slashing water and fertilizer use. This dramatically increases the effective availability of resources without even needing new extraction.
That efficiency gain then fuels the next stage.
Exactly. It frees up resources and drives innovation. AI significantly accelerates R&D in critical areas needed to overcome scarcity. Think breakthroughs in fusion energy, finally providing cheap, clean, abundant power. Advanced vertical farming and cellular agriculture technologies making food production possible anywhere, independent of climate or arable land. New material science, driven by AI, discovering sustainable, abundant replacements for rare or environmentally damaging materials.
Which leads, eventually, to the ultimate vision, the post-scarcity transition.
That's the long-term goal, projected for maybe 2055, 2070 in this optimistic scenario. The combination of radical efficiency and technological abundance makes universal resource access technically feasible. Enough energy, food, water, housing, healthcare for everyone. In this vision, resources are distributed based on need, fundamentally decoupling human well-being from the ability to pay. The scarcity that drives so much conflict and inequality is largely overcome. Human effort, freed from the constant struggle for basic acquisition, can be redirected towards creativity, exploration, science, art, personal growth. The source calls it enabling human flourishing unconstrained by material limitations, a very different world.
So when you boil it all down, the RSAI framework, this whole concept, it's really about providing two things we humans consistently seem to lack when facing these huge slow-motion crises: sufficient lead time and truly coordinated insight.
That's it. It makes the invisible connections visible, and the long-term consequences feel immediate and actionable. It's about transforming foresight into practical action.
But implementing something this vast,
Yeah.
it's not just flipping a switch. The sources talk about phases.
Yes, it's a monumental undertaking. Phase 1 is foundation building. That means actually developing the core AI architecture, deploying the global sensor networks needed to feed it the data, getting international agreements on data sharing standards, and starting with focused pilot projects, maybe monitoring financial stability in one economic bloc or managing water resources in a particularly stressed region like the Nile Basin or the U.S. Southwest, proving the concept in contained areas.
And then phase 2 is scaling up, global deployment.
Right. But that requires more than just technology. It requires a massive global effort in education and training. We need people who understand how to use this system, how to interpret its outputs. The sources envision whole new job categories emerging.
Like
Resource stability analysts, people who bridge the gap between the AI's complex outputs and policymakers' needs. AI ethics supervisors constantly monitoring the system for bias, ensuring fairness, overseeing its ethical operation. Crisis prevention specialists acting as first responders to the AI's early warnings, coordinating preventative actions on the ground. Humans remain absolutely central to interpreting, guiding, and acting on the AI's insights.
It really underscores that this isn't about replacing humans, but augmenting our ability to manage complexity.
Precisely.
Now, considering everything we've discussed, the terrifying clarity of these repeating collapse patterns, our own well-documented history of short-sightedness, that staggering cost of inaction versus action, it brings us back to that final, rather chilling concept from the source, the ultimate shame.
Yeah. The ultimate shame isn't failing because we didn't know better or because we lacked the capability. It's the potential shame of future generations looking back at us knowing that we had the data, we had the predictive tools like RSA, we technically had the resources, just poorly managed and distributed, but we still chose short-term gain, political expediency, or just comfortable inertia over ensuring long-term survival, failing despite having the answers in hand.
So let me leave you, the listener, with this question, building on that idea. Given the clarity of these historical patterns, the 2008 crash precursors, the Syrian drought cascade, the Amazon tipping point warnings, and given the potential for a system like RSA to provide actionable foresight, what do you think is the single biggest human behavioral hurdle that stands in its way? Is it our fundamental present bias, that powerful psychological pull that makes us value today so much more than tomorrow, making future threats feel unreal? Or is it maybe our deep-seated loss aversion, the fear of losing what we have now, our current economic advantages, our familiar ways of life, our hold on resources, being stronger than our desire to gain a stable, sustainable future for everyone? Present bias or loss aversion? What's the bigger enemy of foresight? Something to definitely mull over.
Searching for answers to unanswered questions.
This is DigitView.